The latest Sustainable Development Goals research shows that the world is not on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. In South Africa, despite the policy position on strengthening the national gender machinery, the results are still uninspiring across many sectors of our society. Good evening and welcome to Unfiltered. I'm Sizwe Mpofu Walsh. On the eve of South Africa's National Women's Day, we are reminded that women still bear the brunt of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, and that a vicious war is being waged on their bodies, with incidents of sexual violence remaining disproportionately high. Tonight, we ask, do politicians take gender equality seriously? To help us answer this question, we are joined in studio by Nazli Sharif, the DA's Shadow Minister for the portfolio of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Loyiso Masuku, a member of the ANC Women's League, and via Zoom, we have Tammy Breed, the Freedom Front Plus parliamentary spokesperson for women. Before we explore our conversation tonight, let's watch this scene setter produced by Nono Magongoma.
67 years ago, as more than 20,000 women confronted the apartheid government, protesting the introduction of pass laws for black women, they wished for a different society, a democratic one, in which the rights of all citizens are respected and upheld. Today, almost 30 years into South Africa's democracy, women are still waging various struggles in the boardroom, in their homes, and in society in general. Less women are appointed in leadership positions. Females have the highest unemployment rates in the country, especially black African women, and South Africa remains the country with the highest rates of gender-based violence. This is despite policies and laws geared at achieving gender equality and protecting women against abuse.
When we go to march for the six bodies at John Paul at the court, the same police went and arrested 45 sex workers on that day because they said because there's a killer out there, we want to keep them safe.
I would like to know where is the money to support the NSPGBV work? Why are we being funded by the American-based company and not our own departments in the country?
Government arranged 2 summits on gender-based violence in 2020 and 2022 after mounting pressure against the state to be more responsive to the rampant maiming of women and girls in the country. The first summit emerged with a national strategic plan on gender-based violence and femicide, and about 1.6 billion rands was committed, but some women organizations say they are yet to see it.
We are daughters, we are wives, we are mothers, we are grandmothers, we are aunts, we are nieces, we are cousins, we are sisters.
The South African gender machinery, which includes the National Department of Women, Youth and People with Disabilities, the Ministry's parliamentary portfolio, the Gender Commission and various government departments that are supposed to have gender focal points to push for gender mainstreaming, have been seen as weak and unable to effectively change the fortunes of thousands of women in the country. The most blatant, long-standing, but recently explosive example is experiences of the country's female football team, Banyana Banyana, whose cries for equal treatment remained unattended to, causing international embarrassment to the country, despite many years of raising the same issues against the South African Football Association.
We're hoping that with this achievement that we've brought forward, things are going to change.
With 7 years to go before the 2030 deadline of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals of achieving gender equality, it remains to be seen whether South Africa will be among those who fail to meet their commitments.
Welcome back to Unfiltered. Are we taking women's empowerment seriously enough? Good evening, Ms. Masuku. Let's begin with you. And I know that you're also a regional leader in the ANC in Joburg, as well as an MMC. We've made significant progress as a country since 1994 in terms of gender representation in politics. The National Assembly, for example, is 46% women now, from a very low base. But the higher reaches of political parties still seem to be the disproportionate preserve of men. Why do you think that is? And particularly in the ANC as well, why do you think the highest levels of the party leadership, the Secretary General, the presidency, even the deputy presidency, have not gone further to ensure that there is more representation of women?
Thank you very much, Swize, and good evening to the listeners at home.
Evening.
Gender equality, for me, I think we have to have the conversation differently, because it's not a discussion that we should just be focusing it on women politicians. It should be a whole societal discussion. Because once we bring it to a whole societal discussion, it then also assists in answering some of the questions that we have, because men themselves have to be advocates of gender equality. Men themselves have to have an appreciation of why it is important to have women representation in structures, because if you have women representation in structures, it assists in ensuring that policies are driven, advocacy work is propelled to a higher level. The African National Congress does have a 50% constitutional requirement in terms of ensuring that our structures have got that 50-50%. And what that does, it creates an opportunity for this representation that we seek to speak about. It further has this constitutional requirement as well when it comes to legislatures as well as our caucuses in the various local municipalities. And I think for me, if we shift the discussion from just politicians who are women and we make it a whole societal discussion, it then brings a different discussion, particularly in how different political parties also express themselves in their various spaces, so that the collaborative effort of policy formulation then translates into us being able to have the equal representation as it relates to gender.
Absolutely, and there's no doubt that maybe in distinction to many other parties, the ANC has done well to ensure the representation of women with its 50-50 policy. But I guess there's, just staying on the theme of politics and the ANC, because it's such an important institution in our society, there's this recurring pattern where often women who are perfectly capable, maybe even better qualified to lead than men, are relegated to specific positions within the ANC's top structures. So when we look at what was the top 6 and the top 7, often the deputy secretary position and not the presidency or the deputy presidency. Are you concerned about that? Do you think that it reveals a deeper problem within the party that it may need to overcome?
Not only within the parties, in society in general. Remember how also orientation and how, from our specific backgrounds, how we're orientated, how we grow up. So the differentiator must always be that some women are not as at the level of understanding how important it is to have women leaders taking up the most senior positions. But as I said earlier, remember the ANC has got a full complement of a structure. So the full complement of that structure represents the gender equality, and in terms of 50-50. For me, what we have to do is to do more advocacy work. For me, what we also have to do in the party is affirm women. We have to affirm women. We have to give women an opportunity to be bold and be present so that they can take up these positions. We have to give women an opportunity to be trained, because capacity building is one of the issues in political education that will assist women to stand firm and come forward to say, I'm raising my hand, I am available, give me the opportunity. And then it is a collective effort in the organization, not just a particular effort by women only.
Ms. Sharif, What are your views on this? The ANC has taken a very concerted stance to have 50-50 actually inscribed in the way that they elect leadership. The DA has taken a different position. Do you think that it would be wise to actually legislate within the DA as a party to have greater women representation? As someone who's also risen through the ranks as a woman within the DA.
Yeah, good evening, Sizwe, and thank you for having me on the show.
Evening.
Look, the DA is a liberal organization, so we don't look at quotas. But what we do believe in is equal opportunities. So what we've done in the party is we try to grow our women leaders, just like myself, who started when I was 19 years old at Wits University as a student activist, to now becoming a member of parliament. So we have the Young Leaders Program, we have the Potential Candidates Program. We open our lists to public, so you don't necessarily have to be a DA member, for example, to apply to become a member of parliament within the party. And the reason why we do this is because we believe that people need to put their hands up, and they need to, ensure that this is what they want to do and come with the vigor and the passion that is needed in the political spaces. And I agree with Luiso. It's not just within political parties, it's across society. We saw on your clip talking about Banyana. We just had the Netball World Cup in South Africa, and the conversations around, the inequality, the pay gap, the differences that men and women experience, it's really out there, and that's what we're speaking about. So for the DA, we don't believe in quotas, and as young women in the party, we are advocating for more representation. Of course, I can't sit here and say we're doing amazingly well. There's more that we have to do, and there's more that we can do. But how we do this is a bit different. We need to provide the skills to women in order to be able to do this job.
Can I ask you on that? Because I think we're probably all agreed here about the wider social inequalities in our society and the way that those influence all institutions, political parties included. But when I look at the DA, I think of your top 10 leaders, only 2 are women, and that speaks to almost a crisis of women's representation. So maybe that's an argument for why you should become more deliberate about ensuring the representation of women in your party. What do you think about that? Because 2 of 10 is really pretty woeful.
No, absolutely. Look, we're not in the business of managing optics. We are saying if you feel that you are ready to lead, put your hand up. Put your hand up for the positions, go out there, campaign within the internal structures, and get elected to these positions. And if you see a lot of our activists, our branches, our constituencies, is women. And women are the backbone of the DA and of this society in its entirety. But we need to get women to the point where they're courageous, where they feel that they can put their hand up so that they can lead. We're not just going to put a woman in a position simply because she's a woman so that it looks good to everybody. We believe that you must be fit for purpose and you must want to lead in order to do that. So that's from me. And look, again, Sizwe, I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm saying we have a lot of work to do. 2 out of 10 is not good enough. And we in the DA, our job is to empower women and upskill women so that the next time I come on this show, we have different stats.
Indeed. Ms. Breed, let's come to you as one of the first ever women representatives of the Freedom Front Plus in Parliament.
So cool.
What are your views on the extent to which women's voices have been left out of the top leadership structures in South Africa's political parties?
Thank you, Sizwe, and thank you for the question, and hi to my colleagues. I think the one thing is politics is still seen as a male-dominated place. If you look at throughout the bank political parties and you see how it still is males who feel the need, who put up their hands, who say, I want to be involved. That is still, to a large extent, what we see in politics. What I can, and maybe I would like to mention this, I'm also the national youth leader of the Freedom Front Plus. And my top structure, my deputy youth leader, my youth secretary are all females. The majority of my provincial youth leaders are female. Only 2 of my provincial youth leaders are male. And I think that speaks of a party that starts, focusing on what you should focus on, that focuses on actually getting the job done, getting women there, ensuring that women realize that that the political sphere is for them. And if you look at just a flag or a side note, is women make better counselors than men, because women with their natural nurturing side really understands what service delivery is about, what community activism is about, and you can really see that. So I do believe that we still need to see more. We need to focus on that. And I think one important aspect is us as young female leaders. Nasli is with me in Parliament. Her and I have, regularly discussed what needs to happen and how women need to be empowered. And I think it starts with us being responsible leaders, actually placing men and females to a higher standard, saying that we need to discuss things that are uncomfortable to discuss.
What do you think, Ms. Masuku, is the role of, based on the conversation so far, formal women's structures within political parties, like the Women's League, which is probably the most well-known? The DA also has the Women's Network, I believe. Do you think that these actually serve the purpose of forwarding the project of women's empowerment, or have they become tokenistic structures within the party that really haven't been able to break into the center? Do we still need these structures?
Absolutely, Sizwe. The ANC Women's League has also got what you call the Young Women's Desk. Some of us actually are empowered and are given opportunities through these structures, because they recognize that there are young women who have to be given opportunities. But secondly, without these structures, you may not necessarily have the opportunity to have the space to enter local government. You may not have the opportunity to perhaps be in the legislature. But the most important aspect about these structures is that they provide platforms for women to be capacitated. They provide platforms for women to understand legislation. They provide platforms for women to understand the issues for women on the ground. Because, what we seek to achieve ultimately is not for our own selves as representatives in the public representatives councils. We are representing women, and these structures and the policies that guide. And I want to give you an example. The ANC Women's League, current in their previous conference, they have passed a resolution that 40% of public procurement in the public space must be given to women-owned businesses. So already that shows you the thinking in terms of how it is that we ought to. So for me, they are critical because they are guided, and they've got an obligation to create a pathway for the emancipation of women, for gender equality, and of course dealing with issues of gender-based violence, including the issue that she was mentioning of equal work for equal pay. We have been advocating strongly to say Banyana deserves the equal pay that their counterparts who are in the form of Bafana should be receiving.
Ms. Breert, what are your views on the wisdom of youth and women structures, particularly in political parties, and whether they serve to forward the agenda of those particular segments or actually end up relegating those questions to the periphery?
I think it is such an important question, and I think that is what youth and female, call it committees, call it forums, actually need to ask themselves on a regular basis, because it bodes it has the opportunity to actually become something that is only, as you so rightly said, just another forum, just another manner in politicking. But it has such an important potential to actually drive the agendas of youth, to drive the agendas of females, to actually have the opportunity there where it empowers young people, it empowers women. And I think it was Nazli, both Luyeso and Nazli, that spoke of upskilling. And I think that is what these forums need to do and need to focus on. And I think that is why there should be a need for these. But I think they need to continually ask themselves and reevaluate, is this still the place that they are? Are they still doing it? Because if you are only there for the sake of waving a flag or raising a fist saying, we are for women empowerment, but you are not there truly for the for the groundwork of that, for the upskilling thereof, then it becomes obsolete.
Ms. Sharif, as we round off this segment and we're about to go to a break, just your thoughts on this question about women's structures in political parties.
I agree. I think they serve an important purpose. But apart from upskilling, apart from capacitating, it's also an opportunity for political parties to be on the ground and speak to women. And the DA Women's Network, for example, is one platform that we can drive issues. And we can run campaigns and we can make, our voices heard, that these are the issues that are being faced by women on the ground, and these are the solutions that we are proposing. I'll give you one example. The DA was one of the first political parties to have a sexual harassment policy. And this didn't come from nowhere. This came from the DA Women's Network. In fact, it's women leadership like myself that worked on this policy and championed it. And that's why we now have a sexual harassment policy, and other political parties have followed suit, which is very good, because we need policies in all structures, within politics, within the broader society, in order to regulate and oftentimes keep women safe.
Are political parties treating questions of women empowerment, gender justice, and women's equality with the seriousness with which they deserve? That's our topic this evening. On social media, let's continue this conversation as we go to a break at SABC Unfiltered, and we'll be back after the break to inquire as to whether government's own plans to address gender justice have been effective or not. Welcome back to Unfiltered. We're asking the question whether political parties, South Africa at large, takes questions of women, equality, and gender justice seriously enough. And we're joined by representatives of diverse political parties. Ms. Sharif, can we come to what government has been doing to address the question of women's equality in society? You serve as Shadow Minister for the Ministry of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability. To what extent do you think that ministry should exist in the first place, or should that not be the center of government's work in any case? And how effective do you think that ministry has been in serving its mandate?
Okay, so firstly, as you know, the ministry has gone through a couple of changes. So it was first the Department of Women, and then they moved the NYDA and the youth to the presidency. They moved persons with disability to social development. That didn't work, so they brought everybody back together again. And we spent the first 2 years of this parliamentary term trying to figure out what exactly is the mandate of this department. Our minister was recently reshuffled, so we got a new minister. And that gives me a little bit of hope, because under the previous leadership, the answer to your question is an absolute no. The Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities is not making a difference in people's lives. And I continuously say this, we need to scrap that ministry and give the billions and billions of rands that is being used in that department to the Commission for Gender Equality, who's actually doing work on the ground and changing people's lives. I'll give you an example, Sizwe. In the APP, the annual performance plan of the Department of Women, Youth and Disabilities, their KPIs are reaching, in 1 year, they must do 2 reports. In 1 year, they need to have 5 engagements on Zoom and webinars. That's not going to change women's lives. Women till this day, When we have load shedding and I'm driving alone from the studio to my house, I am vulnerable. When I go and buy bread or try and take public transport, I am vulnerable. I'm going to be harassed. I'm going to be raped. I'm going to be kidnapped. I'm going to be murdered. And so the work of the department is not making a difference in people's lives. The work of the department is not being felt on the ground. And honestly, I feel like they're so over-bloated with staff and, you know, people earning high amounts of salary, but not doing any work. Excuse me, how can monitoring and evaluation not be part of your core mandate? How do you know that what SABC is doing? How do you know what the courts are doing? How do you know what Tutuzela care centers are going through, how under-resourced they are, how undercapacitated they are, if you are not on the ground monitoring the outcomes? When the DG or the minister comes to our committee and they say, oh no, departments give us reports, that's not good enough. A report is not good enough because you can get away with a lot in a report and it doesn't go down to the details. Helen Suzman always said, if you want to see what's happening, you need to go and see for yourself. And I feel like the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disability is a failure, and either they need to restructure and get better leadership, or it needs to be scrapped and money given to the Commission for Gender Equality, because they actually have programs. They look at assisting women with legal aid. They look at cases that they take up. They go to court. They do court monitoring. I mean, I've had cases that I've dealt with GBV, and I'm sure Tammy has as well, where if I call the department, they can't do anything. But I call the CGE, and they are able to assist immediately. And I think that's important.
Strong view put across there. Ms. Masuku, how do you respond to that? And do you agree or disagree that the ministry should exist in its current form?
There's a science to why the ministry is actually in the presidency, because the presidency actually looks at what it is that in terms of mainstreaming. You also know that the Ministry of the Monitoring and Evaluation is also part of the presidency. So it's not something that is in isolation. It is work of government holistically together in cabinet. But what I think we have to have an appreciation of, gender and youth mainstreaming require a coordination. And the department, that particular ministry exists to make sure that that particular coordination is done. It is correct if the DG gives a response to say departments ought to report, because we must make sure in each and every department's report, and including the APPs and the scorecards of the various HODs, youth and gender mainstreaming and vulnerable groups are actually implemented. So you have to have an element of monitoring, an element of coordination. And for me, you know, gender machinery in this country requires that particular facet, and the work of the commission, they complement each other, because the Commission for Gender Equality, as rightfully so, exists also for advocacy and as well as for assisting in assisting with issues of gender-based violence. The ministry plays a pivotal role on also policy formulation in ensuring that we are able to deal with issues of women. I mean, I will give you a typical example in the space that I'm in the local government environment. It is the ministry that intervened when there was an issue of women who were butchered. Together with social development, they came through, and SABC, to intervene and understand the causes. And there was research done and work commissioned to understand what is it that in society for women to be the ones who are attacked and butchered in this particular fashion by their partners, or even by people who are neighbors or living with them in their communities. The ministry is an important element in our space, and I believe firmly that we should support the work of the ministry, right, and we should complement the work of the ministry. Parliamentarians, legislatures must give input on how to improve the work of the ministry. That is why there is oversight. Oversight right. exists for that.
I see you shaking your head, Ms. Sharif, as well, and we have time this evening, so don't worry, we will bring you back in. But what about your perspectives, Ms. Breed, on this question of the ministry, the department, and whether it is actually serving the mandate that many South Africans want it to serve?
Thanks, Sizwe. And I think I have to say I wholeheartedly agree with Nazli on this. Really, and I have to respectfully differ from Lugiso. I think this department has become obsolete. I think in terms of the manner of operations of this department, we are not seeing feet to ground action whatsoever. And I have to differ. Luiso said coordination needs to be done. But I don't think this is what the department actually does. It does not coordinate. It provides report, it gives report to the portfolio committee where it says the SAPs have given us a report and they say that X, Y, and Z. Or the Department of Social Development have said to us that in terms of their Tudukela care centres, they have done A, B, and C. And that to me is, as Nazli also said, that to me is not oversight. That to me is not coordination.
What would you do differently? How do you think the ministry, if you think it should still exist, could be restructured to be more effective?
I'm of the opinion that this department should not exist, that this ministry should not. We should actually do away with it because we are not seeing anything. I don't think, honestly, that a restructuring of it would change it because the mandate is not clear. It has no teeth to actually go and intervene in certain departments where you see actual facts happening. I think in terms of APPs, we already see within departments that there needs to be gender equality, there needs to be certain actions taken. And I think that can, those are the mechanisms that should be enforced. And then, of course, you have your parliamentary portfolio committees that, of course, do oversight and need to see that. But I don't think, unless the mandate of this department becomes more clear-cut, unless they are boots to the ground and unless they get teeth, anything will change.
Ms. Sharif, your thoughts, and if you do disagree that the ministry should exist, what specific proposals would you put forward to actually reshape the way that government coordinates its efforts? Because Ms. Masuku makes a good point.
Absolutely.
At least this ministry channels efforts and attention to this question.
Sizwe, I feel like you give the department too much credit. I agree with Luiso. You need coordination. You do need coordination. You need to understand holistically what is government doing, because it can't be up to one department, it can't be up to one minister to say, okay, I'm going to fight gender-based violence and femicide, I am going to empower women and create economic opportunities. That's nowhere in the world. You need collaboration. You need coordination in order to get things done. But the department doesn't do that. How I would change it is exactly what Tammy says. The department needs teeth. The department needs powers to go to Minister Cele and say, there is no rape kits in police stations. We are giving you 12 days, 7 days to correct it, or else we will come up with these, this is what will happen. That doesn't happen. Oftentimes, the department panders to other departments, and we find ourselves having to, the department defending instead of actually doing the work. Luiso mentions creating policies. The department has not created one policy except for the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, which is 5 years late. Almost 10 million, 15 million, 5 million over 3 years, 15 million rand wasted because the department could not set up any legislation for the National Council of GBVF. I'll just give you one example quickly, Sizwe.
After that.
When we started the process of the National Council on GBVF, the department didn't know top to bottom. They started, maybe we'll do a private member's bill. No, a private member's bill is not going to work. They had to go back. Then they came back and they were like, okay, maybe we need to structure it this way. It was the portfolio committee that said, no, you need to make a bill, piece of legislation that covers the entirety of the National Council of Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. And only in the last term did we start our public hearings, and we're going to conclude our public hearings in September so that we can pass the National Council of GBVF. So no, the department doesn't create policies. The department barely inputs on policy. That is where the CGE comes. The CGE comments on all the policies, not the department.
She agrees that indeed the department has started to do work. When you say it's 5 years late, I tend to disagree because everything has to be done. There has to be research done. There has to be case studies done. So you don't just have to wake up and decide on something without having gone down to the ground. So precisely the point that we are making, the work of the department has to be informed by what is happening actually in our communities. And see, where I stand by my view, you have to have a department that coordinates the work of women, children, and youth. And secondly, for me, what Tammy raises about collaboration and rather having to do things differently. If you have a suggestion, you sit in a portfolio committee, you call these departments and you do oversight of them. That's why we are legislatures. So if us as legislatures, we just want to point a finger on how to deal with these injustices of women, I actually think we're doing injustice to our communities. As public representatives, we must be able to say, this is what we think will work. The department exists. Let us support the work of the department and make sure that at the very least, it provides what it is supposed to do for our women in our country.
Okay, let's go to a break. Plenty of time to continue this important debate about how we center gender justice in our country, women's equality, and continue that important fight. Don't go anywhere. We'll continue this discussion and also center our concerns around the scourge of gender-based violence and how we uproot that terrible blot on our society. Welcome back to Unfiltered. On the eve of Women's Day, we're asking whether political parties, politicians, and those in power take the question of women's equality seriously enough. Ms. Breed, can I start with you in this segment and turn to the theme of gender-based violence? We have a crisis in our country around gender-based violence, around sexual violence, around intimate partner violence, around femicide and what some even term gendercide. How do we, as a country, make this issue the center of our political debate as much as it needs to be? And why have we failed so far, do you think, to really elevate this issue to basically number one on the national agenda priority list?
Thank you, Sizwe. I think let me maybe start with your second question first and say I think it is because we have politics, we've been politicking. We have not gotten down to the crux of it as politicians. GBVF has been used as a ploy of one political party to say that, to grandstand about, I'm doing so much more than you are doing. And it's become that. I think a second thing in how we failed is we have the national summit that you mentioned earlier in the program on GBVF, and we had a second summit, but that's where it stops. We have summits, we have talk shops, we have forums, and we never see where something goes further than that. And I think that is where we have failed as politicians, that is where we have failed as a country. How I think we need to improve that and do better in that is, number one, us as politicians, not just female politicians, but our male counterparts need to a large extent, understand and take responsibility in taking the fight to the ground, to be the ones that do not just make jokes about GBVF, who do not, try and sugarcoat and wash away the actual importance of that. And that is one step. Then I think it needs to start in our schooling. I think we need to start with not just teaching our girl children, but teaching our boy children about GBVF, about the importance of gender roles, about how important and how equal both men and females are in a society. And it needs to start there. I think we need to invite our traditional leaders, who to a large extent, my portfolio is also agriculture. And to a large extent, we see in land reform projects, we see in agricultural projects, that it is still a male-dominated instance. And we need to actually see that our traditional leaders will take heed and actually also take the fight to GBVF, and to ensure that we do not have these patriarchal norms that within society actually still renders the woman as nothing, and renders the woman as nothing mere than an object. And I think that needs to change. But I think that's a difficult road. I think it starts from all different levels, and I think we need more involvement from our male counterparts in this regard.
Ms. Masuku, can I come to you on this question? It's a crucial question for our country. It's one that should be on the agenda, not just on Women's Day, but every day, because this is key to a thriving society. What are your thoughts on how we address this crucial problem at the center of our country's society, its economy, and its politics?
The fight against GBV and femicide should indeed be a 365-day fight. What I think we must appreciate is the fact that there are strides when, Tammy speaks about the summit that was held, and then the second one. And out of that, I would like to just believe that there are steps in the right direction, the improvement of our Tutuzela, including how the SAPS now has got a program to try and train our officers on how to deal with GBV. But we have to go deeper. How also in society we raise our boy children in our different environments. How also we just as a community, and I use the word as a community because if I'm your neighbor, surely I know if there are challenges or there is a problem. And we have to start a culture of being able to give opportunity to our neighbors to say, there's a problem there, we need interventions, so that we get to the crux of what it is that is actually the societal challenge. There are centers in Gauteng that have been opened under the leadership of MEC Mazibuko in community safety, the green doors in our various elements, particularly in our various areas, particularly in our townships, because that's where the stats are higher, in our townships, where you find women being butchered, women being abused by their partners. And the collaborative effort that Tammy speaks about requires all of us. And I mean, some people believe that we need harsher sentences. Some people believe we need chemical castration. But what is important for me is to first deal with what is the issue in society, because it means the problem is going to persist. We can't just be punitive in our approach. We have to then deal with the societal challenges that we have. And also, Sizwe, the role of alcohol, because alcohol has got a huge impact on how these areas, and if you check the numbers, they go up on weekends, on holidays, when there's consumption of alcohol, and how these cases then become so high in the various police stations, and then it becomes an issue of how even the police are unable to deal with it. So we appreciate the efforts of starting to train the police, give them the capacity to deal with GBV.
Absolutely. Ms. Sharif, your views on this?
Yeah, Sizwe, as a GBVF activist, I've thought about this consistently. I just want to note the first national summit, gender-based violence summit, government can never take credit for that. That is the work of grassroots level women activists that came together in the total shutdown and collaborated and said, enough is enough. We are going to make government hear us. And it's interesting because I got a Facebook memory not so long ago on the shutdown. It was in 2017. And I remember being there and all the women coming from all types of society together to say to government, you're not going to ignore us anymore. This is, we want to be heard. And that's where the National Strategic Plan came from. That's where the National GBV Summit came from. The reason why we had a second one is because in the NSP and the declaration that the president signed, it said that we will come back and reconvene to give an update on what has actually been done in government. And you can imagine that update was not a very good update because not much has been done by government. If you look through the National Strategic Plan, we are still working to try and get those implemented. How do we change society? Number one, we need to have trust within government institutions. We need to build trust with the South African police services. We need to build trust within our courts. We need to build trust within our clinics and hospitals. You know, people need to feel like they have somewhere to go to protect them, somewhere they go to where they can actually get justice. Being the rape capital of the world...
Let's leave it there. We're going to go to a break, and then we will conclude and include all of your voices again when we come back. But let's leave it there for now. We go to a break and we come back and ask about the way forward and solutions that will hopefully make us optimistic of centering the question of women's equality in our society. Welcome back to Unfiltered. On the eve of Women's Day, we're centering the question of women's equality. Before we continue with our discussion and conclude it, let's go to some of your tweets and see what you've been saying on social media. Yanga says, it's a matter of action, doing what needs to be done because most of these women are deserving. The real question is, what's stopping the equity movements in these structures, and referring there to political parties. Principle is says, I hope not just representation. We note progress, but record of impact in society on women's struggles that we should measure this progress. Here is a question. What are the ideas on affecting gender mainstreaming and empowerment at all levels in both government and the private sector? Those are some of your views. Continue to tweet and we'll continue the conversation on social media. But before we conclude, Ms. Sharif, you wanted to conclude your point and make any final statements and maybe strike a note of optimism as we round out the show.
Absolutely. So what needs to change is, one, trust in government systems. So government systems needs to work better and provide the services. We need to fight the patriarchy with everything that we have around dinner tables, around braais, in all the spaces that you find yourself in. And we need to speak up. We need to speak up and we need to make our voices heard. Women have the opportunity to use their power to bring change in this country. And that power is by using their vote. So my concluding remarks is to make sure that people who are watching the show, make sure you are registered to vote so that you can use that power in the next election to bring change in the country and change the priorities of the government and bring in a new government that cares and can actually implement policy. It's one thing having policy, it's another thing implementing it. If you've been in government since democracy and you have failed to implement policies, I think that's a good enough indication for voters in the country. So use your power. Your power is in the vote. Just like the women of 1959 used their power to bring change, you have a power in your vote.
Ms. Breed, any concluding thoughts from our conversation and thoughts for the future and the way forward?
Thoughts for the future is, I think, boots to the ground, be active. To our young women especially, politics is not a male-dominated world if we do not make it that. We need young women who care about communities, who care about South Africans as a whole, and that is what we need. We need to see boots to the ground. We need to see them stand up, take a stance, and we need to see them not just celebrate the woman of 1956, but be the woman of 1956 and take a stance.
Absolutely. And Ms. Masuku, your concluding thoughts as we round out the show.
Sizwe, firstly, we have to appreciate that before 1994, we would never have an opportunity to sit like this and have these kind of discussions. Women have been given a platform by this government to have a voice. This government has created platforms for women through different frameworks, through different bills, to ensure that women are at the center of economic empowerment. Women are given opportunities as it relates to access to education, access to science and technology. Women are in platforms that ordinarily, regardless of creed or color, you now have an opportunity to express yourself. That is what the women of 1956 fought for. Those women of fortitude who said it is enough. For us now, as this generation, it is about economic empowerment. It is about making sure that we take up spaces in political environments. And I can tell you now, the African National Congress that I represent is one political party that stands for that and is firm together with its leagues to ensure that women are put first.
As we round out the show, let's go to the social media poll, which is about our question, do politicians take gender equality seriously? 85% say no and 14% say yes, and I think that echoes what many of our panelists have said about the importance of this question and putting it at the forefront of our politics. Thank you very much for joining us on the eve of Women's Day. Thank you very much to my panel. This is not a question on which one should both sides the issue. Women's equality is a clarion call. It's an unequivocal and important question and conversation for our society to grapple with. The scourge of gender-based violence, gendercide and femicide are a stain on our collective conscience. And as we enter this Women's Day, let us all redouble our efforts to ensure gender justice and gender equality. Thank you for joining us on Unfiltered News and Unfiltered Views for another unfiltered conversation.